Hello, welcome to Season 11 of The Horrific Podcast. We're two friends who live in different places but share a love for scary movies. This season, in each episode, we will not both watch the same movie on our own and then record a conversation together about it later. We have 10 previous seasons of doing exactly that, and it's time for something new. This season, each episode will focus on a larger horror topic, trend, or maybe even rumor. We'll speculate about upcoming movies, debate genre definitions, and do our best to apply the perspective of two people who have watched way too many horror movies to different types of horror media. Thanks for coming along for the ride.
Doesn't it feel kind of quaint to talk about a monster movie in 2022?
I don't know what quaint means.
Like, if I were to bring up if I were to say something about monster movies, what are the things that immediately come to mind for you?
Old school 50s, 40s, 30s horror movie monsters.
Yeah, like the Universal monster movies.
Yeah.
And, maybe Jaws or some of the, more kind of iconic ones from the 70s or 80s. But I feel like we don't really think about the monster movie genre as being particularly relevant lately. And I find that interesting because it was so dominant early on.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. Do you think it's because, imagination, you could get away with, the actual monsters, but nowadays the most scary thing, or some of the most scary thing to people, are people themselves or people getting haunted and possessed and then doing something crazy, or just crazy people in general, and they're like, hey, that's the thing? Or do you think it's just original ideas like Frankenstein is no longer?
I think the main thing is just the world is so much more known now. You know what I mean? If you heard a story about a vampire, you could just go to Wikipedia on your phone and look up vampires and learn more in 10 minutes than most people in the 20s would learn their entire life, right? Mm-hmm. And I feel like there's a certain amount of just the uncertainty of that makes it less scary. And the fact that we've been to the moon and that we have satellites everywhere, allegedly, and have satellites everywhere, and, this deep space telescopes and all that, it kind of makes the universe feel a little bit less unknown. So the alien thing isn't quite as compelling as maybe it used to be. But I think that this is one of the more enduring genres of horror movies. I think that a lot of the early monster horror movies have endured really well and are still a very relevant part of modern culture. And I know that we already did an episode about the monster horror subgenre, but as we're approaching the end of season 11, I thought it would be really cool to just revisit this a little bit and talk more about specifics of what has worked well in the monster horror subgenre. And so today we're going to talk about our 3 favorite horror movie monsters, and then maybe spend a little time talking about what an effective monster horror movie might look like in the modern age.
Love it.
I'm excited for this one.
Yeah.
I actually spent a lot of time reading a lot of things, and my notes are not that long, which means I went on a lot of rabbit trails.
I'm excited.
And I enjoyed every minute of it. So, yeah. As far as your list goes, how did you think about it? Was it the 3 that are most impactful in your memory? Was it 3 that you think are the most influential in the genre, or what sort of how did you make your choices?
Well, yeah. Ooh, that's a good one. So honestly, I was just going with why is this one my favorite? And I do have some honorable mentions on here, because I have a couple that's just I can't not say in my top 3. I think it's the impact on the genre itself, meaning did this change up how things were for these types of movies moving forward? Is it something that came out a long time ago and is still something that filmmakers still try to chase today? That kind of idea. And then just this was just a really good they pulled this off very well.
Yep.
Yeah. What about you?
So I'm on like revision 10 of this list. I kept switching them out, but I really tried to get a wide range as far as like the years that the movies came out. So I basically took all of the ones that I wanted, and then I just got the ones that were like the most spaced out, and that I feel like all kind of touch on like a little bit different parts of horror or like eras of horror. And so that's kind of how I ended up doing it. So my number 1 is the oldest, and my number 3 is the newest.
You always got a good way of doing stuff, man. I just wing it.
Well, I overanalyze it, and then I spend too much time on it. So, you know. Who knows? What was your number 1?
So my number 1 is actually the Babadook.
Nice. I almost had that one too.
Yeah. So first off, I just love the movie Babadook. I know rewatching it, the kid can get a little distracted. You can get a little distracted with him because he's very rough. He's an intense kid. He's a loud. There you go. I was trying to be nice. Very loud kid, but just like the idea of what it was, like, and like the mystery that's around it. Like, if this was an American film, I think it easily would have had like Babadook 1000, like by now, just like.
Oh, like lots and lots of sequels.
Yeah, sequel on sequel on sequel. But I don't know. It just caught me off guard. Like, I like the idea of it. Is it a book? Like, what is it? And then it possesses like people, which is the Babadook. I don't know. It was just that whole mixture of it. And like I said, it's just one of my more favorite horror films. And so, I don't know. It was just original. I just went with it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And that was one that really stood out to me as well, that I think is a monster movie asterisk.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because it was a little bit more like telling it. The monster represented something. The monster wasn't just a monster.
That's very
Does
true.
that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does.
And so I think that you're kind of already getting into a thing I want to talk about with my third one, but I feel like that's definitely a key part of more like modern takes on the monster subgenre, is having the monster not just be, you know, a giant shark, but it's like the manifestation of a thing that the character is actually dealing with or something.
Yeah.
And so that's interesting. And it's an interesting way that has kind of evolved and stayed relevant over time, when now, you know, especially when we did like our decades of horror or horror through the decades, that we saw, like, as we got closer to the modern age, things got a lot more like psychological and a lot more like pitched in terms of, you know, mental illness and things like that. Yeah. And I think that, you know, we kind of see that with monsters as well.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you honestly just hit the nail on the head on that one. It was just intense, original. I felt like, and the movie itself is what it is. I know this is about the monsters, but it just worked out for me.
Yeah.
What about you? What was your first one?
So my first one was actually Godzilla. And it occurred to me that I cannot believe we have not done an episode on a Godzilla movie yet, because there are so damn many of them.
That's true.
But the original, the OG, came out in 1954. And it's just kind of that like iconic nuclear age giant creature horror. And Them, which we have done an episode on, came out the same year. And what's interesting to me is like Them was kind of a one and done, and then there were a bunch of other like copycat movies of like, oh, other bugs could get big because of nuclear stuff. But Godzilla really, it was a unique thing. Like that whole style of making the movie of like having the giant person in the costume destroying the miniature villages and stuff was just such an interesting way of doing it at the time, that was like so practical effects and low budget, but like still getting the idea across. And then I'm really interested in the way that the character of Godzilla has changed over time, because it went from being just straight up monster that destroys your city to now all of a sudden all these other creatures are coming and attacking the city, and Godzilla has become like a protector,
like the anti-hero.
Yeah, exactly. And so the Godzilla series holds the Guinness record for longest running film franchise, according to Wikipedia, because they are still making like new Godzilla movies. And I think that there's something about that idea of this creature that is like a destructive force that was made out of, sort of man-made causes, also could be our only hope against, even worse things that have come along. And there's a lot going on with that. And I think a lot, through the ages, it's been kind of adapted to be relevant. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of cool for a thing that started off as a guy in a rubber dinosaur suit.
Yeah. Admittedly, I don't know if I've actually ever seen a full Godzilla film.
It's been many years for me, and I don't know that I've ever seen it without commercial breaks.
Yeah. Yeah, because I was just sitting here thinking, I was like, I wonder how he gets away in the first one. And why he gets to come back. It's like, oh yeah, you probably don't know that because you haven't seen him.
Do you know what the first sequel was named?
What?
Godzilla Rides Again.
I love it, dude. That's amazing. Like, that's legit.
Real life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what was your number 2?
So I'm gonna go, so my number 2 is actually the crawlers from The Descent.
Ooh.
Yep.
I love that.
Yeah. So first off, love The Descent.
Yes.
It's a really good film. And I guess they're in the second one too, but not anything wrong with that one. It's just, I was specifically talking about the first one, thinking of this list. Mixture of like vampire, like monster, they can't see anything, like, so they adapted, they were human, I guess still kind of are or something. It was just the overall from that, like, they had their weaknesses, with, if they don't move, make sound, can't be seen. But, it was just like, this is what I feel like the evolution of like Dracula has turned into, and I know Dracula's on the top list, Dracula, Frankenstein, and that, like, that's just a common, everyone knows I love Frankenstein. I didn't put him on this list because it's just such a common thing. But I think it's just like it was a natural progression for those, but just original an idea itself, and the fact that there's still just the thought of like, if I were to ever go cave diving, which doesn't seem realistic, or let's just say out camping, stumble upon this place, like there's a chance that there's going to be some creepy, kind of like the Bigfoot thing, where you never know if Bigfoot's actually real or not. You never know if these things are actually, if things like this are actually out there, and so that's creepy to me, and so that's why I added them.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's good. The idea of sort of the thing out in nature that you could find yourself being pursued by, that are very much in their element in a place where you are very much not in yours.
Right.
I think is a kind of a recurring theme, and I feel like the way that those were presented was especially effective. Like, that movie's excellent. Yeah,
absolutely. It was just one too that I think caught me off guard, because we had owned that movie forever, and then when I finally watched it, I was like, wait, why haven't I watched this more? And it was just the intensity that they have, and there's no like number, like you don't know how many of them there are. Mm-hmm. Like, I was even thinking of like in the movie, but Bone Crusher, it's kind of like a similar, like, in a way, but like you knew how many were there, and so you knew like if he killed the 2 at the end, they should be okay. Like, it was just something like that. With this, you don't know how many's out there. It's just like a not like a hive mentality, but they're just a big civilization down there of these crawlers.
Yeah.
What about you? What's your second?
My number 2, I feel like I took the easy way out, but I just can't get over it. It's super iconic, and it's The Thing from 1982.
Ooh, I like it.
I mean, that was just such a great combination of practical effects and body horror, and the premise of that monster was just so terrifying because it can basically become anything and you don't know who you can trust. I mean, like, this thing could be spreading across the world right now and we might not even know. And I think that unknown of it is really effective. And then also, like, the psychological impact that it had on all the people, like all the people that were in the research station, and the way that they reacted to the situation was, like, almost as scary as the thing itself. So, like, it was not just, like, the creature, but, like, the nature of the creature and the impact that it had on everybody who was around it was just chilling.
Yeah, no, I can see that for sure.
But that one, too, I think is a little bit of that, like, I mean, anything could come from outer space time period, right? Because it's this thing, you know, that there isn't really a lot of background or explanation for it. It's just all of a sudden it fell from the sky and it's here and it's wreaking havoc.
Yeah, and, you know, I get like this myself where, like, I put too much logic into some films. You know, it's why I'm not necessarily, like, the most scared of, like, Jaws or anything like that, not anywhere close to ocean. I don't know, but you know, I think the alternative, the counter to that is, like, if it's from outer space, like, you never know. I mean, we just saw new images from space from the new telescope, whatever it was, Weber or something like that, and it's like these are all galaxies out there, and it's like, okay, 100% likely that something like that could actually happen. You never know. There's so many universes out there, and crazy.
Yep.
Crazy stuff.
Yep. So what was your number 3?
So the third, and then, like I said, I want to do my honorable mentions after we both gone.
Always got to have the last word. No. You're the real monster.
I am. Yeah, me. I have to go with Regan McNeil from The Exorcist.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so this is one of the ones that I guess I kind of brushed up on, but this is one of the ones that is many movies have tried to duplicate what that character. I feel like even they have, you know, an Exorcist, you know, whatever Exorcist film, insert whatever, like it's all based off of this character, 100%. Yeah. Films with exorcisms isn't necessarily my most favorite, but it's just like how well they did. Like they took a innocent, you know, elementary school girl and like turned her into like this monster demon that just, I mean, it was just intense. You know, the intensity of the, you know, head spinning, this throw up, just all of that. Like that's a prime example of like a monster. I feel like is turning someone into something that they're not, you know, and keeping it going, and so making other films want to do it.
So you're thinking like the demon, which I think was named Pazuzu.
Yeah.
And his like, but like specifically him possessing her.
Her. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess you're right. Cause there has been like possession, you know, horror films, but this one just did it right. In my opinion. Like it was intense. Like I just kind of think of like, what I was kind of thinking of is like I had watched American Werewolf in London not too long ago, and like obviously they turn into werewolves, and you know it's like, well, that's intense, but like that's just a dude turning into a werewolf. Like I don't know, just wasn't that big of a transformation as like Zuzu and taking over Reagan, and so that was the main one, or one of the main reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's your final? I guess you're number 1.
Well, I feel better about it now because I didn't know if you were going to try to call me out on like a technical detail and debate whether or not this was actually a monster. And I'm like, well, yeah, you just did a possessed girl. Okay, so I'm good here. Mine is the STD monster from It Follows.
That's funny because that's on my honorable mention. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Yeah. But yeah, kind of like we were talking about with the Babadook. You know, I feel like with a lot of the more modern stuff, the monster is a lot more psychological. And so, you know, in Babadook, it was kind of like a symbol of the mom's grief and the impact it's having on her and her son's lives and their relationship and everything else. But, you know, in It Follows, the monster is invisible, and it kind of represents your fear of something inevitable like death and being chased by that, and the way that it can just like wreck your life. And so it seems like the monsters now are a lot more metaphorical and psychological and less like giant scary bug.
Right. Yeah. Well, and the thing too is like, I feel like with this film, like yet again, original situation. And it's funny too, because even though it came out in 2014, like I was just on Reddit, and I've seen like this post kind of going around for a little bit, but it's like, okay, you get $10 million, but a slug follows you for your whole life. There's no stopping them, and when they get to you, you die. Like, would you still take the money? And I was like, well, that's basically like It Follows, except for you have money, so you might as well just go for it. Yeah.
Well, it's basically like Mortality, except you have money. So.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Actually, yeah.
But yeah, so that, and I think that's a really good movie, and I think that really is kind of one of the best examples of like a modern, like what would a horror movie look like in 2022?
Yeah.
And I think that definitely their audiences react well to some kind of psychological thing that comes along with it, or something that makes it even more unknown. And to us in modern society, I feel like paranormal, or the paranormal realm, is one of the few places left that most people feel like are very unknown and inaccessible. Yeah. And so I think we've seen a big shift towards that, rather than, a really big, King Kong climbing the Empire State Building or whatever.
Yeah, that's a good point. And a full circle, kind of answering what we talked about earlier in this episode.
It's almost like I planned it that way.
Oh my god.
4-dimensional chess, my friend.
Good lord.
But now I'm excited to hear what your honorable mentions are. Like, what do you got?
Yeah, so my honorable mentions are the ones that, like, I think if someone was listening to us from day one to now would know, so Frankenstein, obvious, just one of my favorites.
No, for sure.
The fast-running zombies from 28 Days Later.
Oh, yeah.
Because that, like, legit, just like I was talking about with, like, Reagan, I was trying to go with, like, ideas that people may not have thought that I would put on here. Because, like, I legit like these, but, the fast-running zombies, that completely changed the game.
Yeah.
In fact, in a way, which I know it wasn't meant to, and maybe no one else sees it this way, but in a way, it kind of hurt slow zombie movies. Basing this off of a zombie film I watched last night that was Slow Zombies that wasn't as intense. But one of my favorites, Pennywise is on there. Michael Myers, obviously. Jason is on there. The man from Hush, he's on here too. I really liked, one of the reasons for him was it was just like that whole, it's the same as why I have the Man in the Mask, Dollface, and Pinup Girl on here. It's just like, there's no actual reason for why they're doing what they're doing. They're just doing opportunist,
Yeah.
I have It Follows on here, for the reasons you just spoke about. But my final one is just a shout out to a film that kind of caught me off guard and just loved it. Was The Ants from Them. It's just the reason is probably like why Godzilla's on the list for you. It's just like if you ask me like, hey, give me a 50s sci-fi horror film to watch, like I'm gonna tell them. I just liked it. It was ants aren't necessarily the most scary characters in the world, but
so would you perhaps say that a 50s movie about giant ants is somewhat quaint in 2022?
I would say it's very quaint.
Indeed.
Now that I Googled the definition of it. If you guys heard me typing in this, I was literally Googling definition of quaint.
Yeah.
No, it definitely is. The last one too is the I can't remember what they're called. I think it starts with a G, but the monsters from Tremors, specifically. The first one. I just like that movie too. Yeah. So I had to go with that too, because it was like it was just such a strange. But that was also a movie that came out in the '90s that could have easily came out. Obviously PG, but came out in the 50s and fit right up that genre. Like that is, I just watched it. That's a 50s sci-fi action or horror film, like remake. It felt like so. Yeah. And then Wolfman's on there, but that was just such a good film. Like Lon Chaney Jr. did so well. Oh, yeah. It was also like the filming of it, like it looked like it was high def. It was crazy, but those were some of my favorites.
Yeah, the other ones that I had on the list initially that I got out either because I was just sure you would bring them up or because I felt like I'd be repeating the same points was like Frankenstein, obviously, Dracula, but like the Bela Lugosi version just because he's so iconic, and also Jaws, just because I feel like that has been such an enduring impact, like that whole concept and the way that movie was pulled off and the way that, like, how many people do you think are alive today in the world that are scared of sharks because of Jaws? Yeah. Because I bet 100%. It's like a decent percentage of the population that lives in a place where you can watch movies.
Yeah. So, no, I agree. And I think it's the same reason of like why Reagan McNeil is probably a little bit more intense for, the religious, Catholic people, I get it, The one too, I just remembered the tethered characters from Us too. Those were some of my favorites because that's like yourself killing yourself. Yeah, it's just weird.
The last thing I had on my list was there's a movie from 2017 that I feel like no one else watched, but it's called Life, and it is a sci-fi space horror movie with Jake Gyllenhaal. And it's like there's a sample cell or something from Mars that they get on the International Space Station. And so it's like kind of like The Thing if it were in outer space instead of at a like Arctic research station. But it's actually like pretty well made and well filmed and has that like you're enclosed with a creature that's trying to kill you that you don't know what it's capable of type thing. Yeah. And it just felt like one of those like very like sold out sci-fi horror movies made in the modern era, which I feel like we haven't seen a whole lot of. So I enjoyed it.
Yeah. I see that. I was thinking too, like with the fast zombies from 28 Days Later, like just imagine like what Train to Busan would have been, without them. Yeah. It's just like that. Like, so some of my favorite zombie films too came from, that. So that's just a prime example.
Oh, and also, what's going to be a really interesting, iconic movie monster?
What's that?
Soon.
Aliens.
Winnie the Pooh.
Oh, I know. I know.
Can you believe that?
Good Lord, that's all. Yeah. That's such an interesting. Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey.
Yeah, we're going long, but for anyone who's listening, if you just want to read something that will make you giggle, just Google Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, and you're welcome.
It's so strange because, like, I just don't. I don't understand it, but I'll watch it. By God.
And that's it for today's episode. If you've listened this far, then thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed it. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have any questions, comments, or movie suggestions, please send us an email at thehorrificpod@gmail.com, or feel free to comment on or message our Facebook page. Just search for The Horrific Podcast. Thanks for listening.
I don't understand it, but I'll watch it, by God.